You won't believe it, but one of Queen Elizabeth II's favorite pieces of jewelry isn't British at all. It came from Russia and was smuggled out of the country inside a lady's hat, right under the noses of armed Red Guards during the Revolution. Who saved it? A man in a dress or a covert agent? Why did one of the most powerful women in Britain make a personal deal that people still whisper about today? And what are those strange rumors still circulating in London about the magical power of the pearls in this tiara? We're about to tell you how, without a single shot being fired, a true Romanov treasure ended up in the hands of the Windsors. How a woman who once dreamed of placing her own son on the Russian throne hid her jewels within palace walls. And how today, more than a century later, a tiara that rightfully belongs in the Hermitage still shines from inside the British royal collection. And most importantly, at the very end, you'll learn why this story still stirs debate, gossip, and some very uncomfortable questions. Stay tuned. This isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a crown of power, betrayal, and survival. Watch until the end. The best is yet to come. Queen Elizabeth II. Impeccable posture, measured gestures, a gaze that carries the weight of an empire's history. And of course, the jewelry, always under the spotlight of hundreds of cameras. One image you've surely seen. On the Queen's head, a dazzling tiara with pearl drops seemingly frozen mid-air. It's considered one of the most recognizable pieces in the royal collection. But almost no one realizes it's not British at all. This tiara was crafted by Russian jewelers, made specifically for the Romanovs. Is it just a coincidence, a lucky acquisition, or is it a remnant of a tangled drama that began in St. Petersburg and ended in London? This was the tiara the Queen wore on state visits, to receive world leaders, and to record her annual Christmas addresses. It wasn't just a favorite accessory, it was a symbol. But a symbol of what? The story of the Vladimir tiara isn't something you'll hear on a Buckingham Palace tour, and it's certainly not promoted in press releases, because this tiara is a traveler. It has seen the splendor of imperial balls, echoed footsteps on the marble stairs of the Winter Palace, felt the breath of panic in a train station during Russia's time of turmoil, and rested in the silent luxury of English vaults. Behind each pearl is a fate. Behind each diamond, a choice. Personal, political, and sometimes irreversible. So how did a piece made for a Grand Duchess of the Romanov dynasty end up as part of the British crown jewels decades later? Who commissioned this masterpiece? Why was it hidden away, smuggled out, and who eventually inherited it? What we have here is not just a story about jewelry, it's a plotline steeped in power, ambition, loyalty, and survival. And while the whole world watched the Queen, admiring her presence, almost no one noticed the pearls on her tiara were silent witnesses to Russian history, a history nearly forgotten. Almost, but not by us.
St. Petersburg, 1874. The empire is abuzz with anticipation for one of the grandest weddings of its time. The heir to the Romanov bloodline, Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, son of Emperor Alexander II, is preparing to tie his fate to that of a German princess, Marie Alexandrine of Mecklenburg-Schwerin. The union of two great houses, Romanov and Schwerin, is orchestrated with such opulence that the event itself becomes a display of power, taste, and imperial tradition. For the Romanovs, this is more than a marriage. It's a political statement, reinforcing international ties and reaffirming the status and prestige of the imperial family. And, surprisingly, this story doesn't begin with vows, flowers, or a first dance. It begins with a gift that would forever change the fate of one woman, and one singular piece of jewelry. Vladimir Alexandrovich knew that the wedding present for his future bride couldn't just be lavish, it had to make a statement. He turned to one of the most celebrated jewelry houses of the Russian Empire, the Bolin Workshop in St. Petersburg. a firm already serving the imperial court and considered the pinnacle of high society's taste. The challenge was ambitious, to create a piece worthy of a princess, something entirely new, unforgettable, technically complex, and flawless in every detail. And thus, the tiara was born. Its design, interwoven loops encrusted with diamonds, crowned with delicate pear-shaped pearls that appeared like dewdrops suspended in the morning mist. It wasn't merely a jewel, it was a revelation. At first glance, the tiara evoked something ancient, almost magical, as though it belonged not to a person, but to a dynasty, an era, a legend. It had everything: technical brilliance, artistic intuition, and that undescribable charm that transforms metal and stone into emotion.
For Marie, raised in the German court and soon to be baptized as Maria Pavlovna, this tiara became far more than a wedding ornament. It was a personal talisman, a symbol of the new chapter in her life. She wore it not like a soulless diamond crown, but as a piece of herself, an extension of a woman who could be gentle and steely, obedient and ambitious, noble and dangerous all at once. The wedding was a spectacle, halls filled with fresh flowers, tables set with gilded porcelain, guests in full dress uniforms, orders and silks shimmering under crystal chandeliers. And yet, it was the tiara that stole the show. No one could take their eyes off its intricate design, the perfect harmony of pearl and sparkle, the overwhelming sense that this creation had long belonged to history and had now simply found its rightful owner. Though the day was about a union of hearts, those in the wings understood. This was a jeweled manifesto of an era. Boleyn's new masterpiece instantly entered the highest echelon of imperial treasures, and no one could have imagined that a century later, this same tiara would come to symbolize a very different monarchy in a very different corner of Europe. But that would come later. For now, beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and the music of the imperial orchestra, the young Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna places upon her head the tiara that would one day become her weapon, her burden, and her legend. In the very heart of St. Petersburg, on the palace embankment, stood a marble giant, the Vladimir Palace, an architectural monument to imperial dignity, yes, but also something more. A place where people whispered about things too dangerous to discuss in the Winter Palace. Here, diplomats, writers, industrialists, and sometimes those whose opinions had been deemed unacceptable by the new emperor, gathered in hushed salons. It was within the home of Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich that a quiet yet deliberate alternative vision for the empire began to take shape. No barricades were built here, but chess pieces were carefully moved. No slogans were shouted, but the soft click of jewel boxes spoke volumes. Every gemstone represented more than just taste. It represented position. Maria Pavlovna, once a German princess, now a Grand Duchess and mistress of the palace, still reigned over the social scene. And if the tiara had once been just a wedding gift, it had now transformed into a symbol, silent but eloquent, like a gaze before a duel. Society understood. If Maria Pavlovna appeared wearing the tiara, the evening was no longer a ball, it was a battleground. And she always emerged victorious. The new emperor's wife, Alexandra Fyodorovna, was a reserved, devout woman, far removed from the glamour of high society. Her image was strict, restrained, almost ascetic, the perfect foil for Maria Pavlovna, who knew not only how to wear jewels, but how to command them, turning each public appearance into a political act. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse, she didn't demand. She wore pearls. Her soirees were legendary, rooms overflowing with flowers, candles reflected in gilded mirrors, the scent of French perfume, refined dishes, Counts and princes discussing the weather, finances, and who stood with whom. Beneath all the lace and crystal, however, there was a quiet resistance. Not external, not aggressive, but the kind you don't arrest. The kind that works from within. Vladimir Alexandrovich's palace became a haven for those who questioned Nicholas II's leadership, who envisioned a different Russia, who dreamed of a more pragmatic, less romantic course. The Grand Duke himself maintained a public face of loyalty, but disappointment hung in the air. Maria Pavlovna, on the other hand, made no secret of her discontent. Some whispered that she didn't want her nephew on the throne. She wanted one of her own sons, and that explained a great deal. Every detail of her wardrobe, every brooch, necklace, or earring, all spoke a coded language understood in the salons of St. Petersburg. But the tiara stood above them all. When Maria Pavlovna wore it, it was as if she were delivering a speech without uttering a single word. You may call Alexandra the Empress, but tonight, I am the one crowned. It was in these years that the tiara fully transcended its status as a jewelry masterpiece. It was no longer just an ornament. It was a mark of rank, of power, of defiance. And as Russia swayed more and more under the pressure of change, the chandeliers of the Vladimir Palace still glittered, crystals still clinked, the orchestra still played. But behind closed doors, whispers of unease began to gather. And in those whispers, a message grew louder. The time for change was near. 1917. An empire built on the foundation of centuries-old tradition was crumbling before the world's eyes. The streets were in chaos. Soldiers were defecting to the rebels. Telegrams arrived one after another, brief, dry, but laced with panic. What had seemed unshakable just yesterday was now turning to dust. The Romanovs were no longer in power, and those who had once hosted dignitaries in marble halls were now frantically deciding what to take, what to leave behind, and most importantly, where to flee before it was too late. Inside the Vladimir Palace, now nearly deserted but still echoing with traces of former grandeur, one thing remained untouched: Maria Pavlovna's collection of jewels. None of these pieces had ever sat behind a shop window. Each was a story, each an investment, each a shield. And above all, one piece stood out: the tiara. The tiara, the Vladimir tiara, a symbol of power, of pride, of dynastic memory. Maria Pavlovna, no longer young but sharp as ever, understood perfectly. In times like these, survival meant protecting what truly mattered. The palace was gone, the influence, the guards, gone, but the jewels remained, and she had a plan. Leaving St. Petersburg was no longer a matter of preference, it was survival. Disguised as a simple trip to the health resorts in Kislovodsk, she made her exit, but before leaving, she gave precise orders. Hide everything of value. Hide it so well that no search party, no accident, no passage of time could uncover it. In a hidden compartment of the Vladimir Palace, somewhere even the servants didn't know to look, the collection was concealed, including the tiara. What followed would later be described as one of the boldest jewel rescue missions of the 20th century. No armed guards, no royal escorts, no evacuation plan, just a few trusted people, just faith, and one man to do the impossible, a British diplomatic courier named Albert Stopford. Maria Pavlovna chose him for a reason: intelligent, precise,
loyal, and long acquainted with the Romanovs. Stopford was the kind of man who could slip past guards unnoticed. And he understood this was not about smuggling valuables. This was about rescuing history. The method he used still sounds like legend today, but it was very real. Disguised as a woman, complete with makeup and widow's attire, Stopford ventured into the heart of a city in revolution. In full drag, posing as a grieving noble woman, he made his way to the palace and extracted the heavy jewel boxes from their hiding place. Not gold, memory, not just diamonds, whispers from an entire era. The tiara, brooches, necklaces, pendants, each piece carefully packed and smuggled out of the palace. The journey ahead was treacherous, a risky route through Europe. Checkpoints, suspicion, inspections, every step under the threat of arrest. But the treasure made it. It reached the place where revolutions were just headlines, not gunshots outside the window. While most Romanovs lost their wealth, their names, and often their lives, Maria Pavlovna bought herself time. She disappeared from view, but preserved the one thing that might secure her family's future, her arsenal of jewels. Because she knew, no more galas, no more glittering receptions lay ahead. What came next was survival. And in that fight, the tiara wasn't just a memory of a lost world. It was a passport to a new one.
He was not tall, delicately built, with expressive eyes and manners that looked equally natural in a dinner suit, and, as history would show, in a corset trimmed with ruffles. Albert Stopford, a Briton with an impeccable reputation. The central figure in what journalists would later call one of the boldest jewel smuggling operations of the 20th century. The irony? Stopford was never a spy. But he became one, unintentionally, for the sake of a woman he deeply respected, and for a collection too important to abandon. By the time he received Maria Pavlovna's letter, she was already in Kislovodsk. Her tone was restrained as always, but between the lines, panic seeped through. Help is needed. And he knew everything was on the line. Not just the fate of the jewels, but the honor of a family that had welcomed him into their salons, trusted him with their secrets, and sought his advice in times of uncertainty. The plan took shape quickly. A direct attempt would be suicide. The Bolsheviks were actively confiscating aristocratic property. The Vladimir Palace was under watch, if even only loosely. A diversion was needed, a cover story, a performance. And Albert decided to take the stage. He became a madam. A woman's dress was selected with millimetric precision, his face powdered, his hair concealed beneath a voluminous hat. The persona? A grieving widow returning to collect personal items of her late husband. The accent? Aristocratic. The posture? Impeccable. And just like that, he stepped into his own private theater, right under the nose of the new regime. Entering the palace, the same one where music once played and champagne was served with caviar, Stopford moved quickly, almost mechanically. In a certain room stood an antique chest with a false bottom. Inside, neatly wrapped treasures. Diamond brooches, necklaces, earrings, rings, and there it was, the tiara, folded like a crown removed from a marble statue. Calm, silent, majestic. He didn't hesitate, he executed. Everything was packed carefully into a travel bag, not a glamorous one, a plain, worn satchel, the belongings of a noblewoman heading to a modest countryside retreat. At the exit, a routine inspection. 2 red guards,
Tired, indifferent, reeking of cheap tobacco. One glanced lazily into the bag. Women's undergarments, old lace, a few papers. The tiara hidden beneath the linens, the pearls tucked away in a plain pouch. No sign of treasure. "Go ahead, comrade." And she went. Or rather, he did. Albert left the palace. Behind him, an entire era. In his hands, what had dazzled the world at imperial balls and might yet save lives. From Petrograd through Helsinki, and then through a chain of diplomatic contacts to London, the entire mission took several weeks, but the outcome was astonishing. Maria Pavlovna's collection crossed borders quietly, unofficially but completely. Where houses collapsed, powers shifted, and archives burned, the Romanov dynasty's jeweled legacy survived. Because of one man, in a dress, with courage entire battalions might have lacked. A story almost too incredible to believe. Yet every detail is true, every step documented. Every stone in that bag was a fragment of a dynasty whose glory was cast into exile. And among all those treasures, one shone brighter than the rest. The Vladimir tiara.
Paris, late 1920s. In a city where jazz, cabaret, schemes, and bold new ideas pulse behind every facade, far from the glittering storefronts, lives a woman who once walked through throne rooms, wearing jewels so powerful they dazzled even by candlelight. Now she has a modest apartment, a tiny sitting room, and a silence broken only by the echo of memory. This is Princess Elena Vladimirovna, the only daughter of the great Maria Pavlovna, the last heir to a collection once envied by empresses, and the new owner of the Vladimir tiara. Her mother was gone, not suddenly, but painfully. Emigration had drained her strength, eroded her health, and, most of all, pulled the ground from beneath her feet. For Maria Pavlovna, Russia was not just a place on the map. It was everything. Culture, status, memories, the right to speak and be heard. And when that disappeared, so did she. Elena inherited not just the tiara, she inherited a weight, a responsibility, a relic that didn't simply sparkle, it breathed history. But with it came harsh reality. Titles, heritage, family names, none of them opened doors anymore. Money was nearly gone. Connections were fading. Europe, absorbed in its own chaos, quickly forgot those who shaped the fate of nations. The princess walked on foot, dressed simply, restitched old dresses, boiled tea, and counted coins to pay rent. And more often, her gaze would settle on that velvet case, the one that held the Vladimir tiara, carefully nestled like a sacred object. She knew this was her way out, but she also knew this was goodbye. To sell the tiara meant more than parting with a jewel. It meant severing a thread, an invisible one that tied her to home, to her mother, to her childhood. And yet, she had no choice. The deal happened quietly. No loud auctions, no press releases, no photographs in the papers. The buyer was a woman known in Britain as the designer queen, collector of dynastic treasures, and the great modernizer of royal taste, Mary of Teck, the grandmother of the future Queen Elizabeth II. Conservative, practical, emotionally distant, but with a flawless eye for anything connected to power and symbolism. She wasn't buying beauty, she was buying history. For her, every stone wasn't just sparkle, it was context, heritage, and a tool of influence. She didn't acquire jewelry for ornament's sake, she acquired force. And so, Mary of Teck became the new owner of the Vladimir tiara. From that moment on, the fate of this Russian crown was no longer Russian, but its story was only entering a new chapter. While some were erasing the past, Queen Mary was inscribing it into the future. a tiara born in St. Petersburg, rescued through disguise and hidden compartments, sold in a moment of desperation, now found itself at the heart of another empire. And it wouldn't stay silent. Not at all. She wasn't born into luxury, yet she ended her life surrounded by crowns, medals, imperial portraits, and boxes of jewels. Mary of Teck, grandmother of the future Queen Elizabeth II, a woman whose character made footmen tremble, inspired awe in court jewelers, and most importantly, earned the respect of even those who despised the monarchy. In the history of the British royal court, she remains the most pragmatic and systematic architect of the royal collection. It was she who turned royal jewelry into something more than ornament, a perfectly crafted tool of dynastic politics. Mary didn't come from the principal line of Europe's great dynasties. She wasn't a princess or a duchess by birthright. Half British, half German aristocrat, she was nearly destined to remain an old maid. But fate took a sharp turn. After the death of her original fiancé, Prince Albert Victor, she was married off to his younger brother, George, the future King George V. From that moment on, Mary of Teck became a fully integrated part of the Windsor machine of power. Her interest in jewelry didn't come from vanity. It was a cold, calculated strategy. To Mary, every stone, every brooch, every tiara carried meaning and purpose. She had no interest in fleeting fashion trends. She wasn't building a wardrobe. She was crafting political weaponry. In jewelry, Mary saw dynastic statements, historical continuity, the image of the monarchy carved in stone. So when she was offered the chance to buy a Russian Grand Duchess's tiara, she understood immediately. This was no mere rarity. This was a symbol of one empire's fall and another's triumphant consolidation. The Vladimir tiara was too unique to be hidden away. Its design, lace-like, airy, weightless, with teardrop pearls seeming to float in midair, stood out immediately against the heavy Victorian diadems. It was both delicate and majestic. But Mary, with her trademark practicality, made a decision. Even a masterpiece can be made more useful. She didn't just acquire the tiara, she invested in its evolution. Her instructions to the royal jewelers were precise. Make the pendants detachable. The pearls could be replaced with emeralds, with diamonds, or removed entirely, leaving just the delicate hoops. And so, the Vladimir tiara became a transformer. One day, an elegant pearl crown. The next, a shimmering cloud of emeralds. Another, clean geometry with nothing dangling. This wasn't just modernization, it was a strategic move. The tiara could now be worn at different receptions with different gowns in different political contexts. No tiresome repetition, no same old crown fatigue for the public. This flexibility made the tiara not just decorative, but functional, universal, and therefore worthy of being part of the Queen's personal collection. From that moment, the tiara truly left behind its Russian identity and entered the world of British royal aesthetics. And yet, paradoxically, with every new pendant, every transformed version, it only reminded more of where it came from. Because no transformation could erase the power of Russian style. No craftsman could carve out the Romanov spirit. Even altered, the tiara remained what it always was, a masterpiece in which the history of an entire nation still lived. And it was this very version, versatile, modernized, and layered with symbolism, that Mary of Teck passed on to her granddaughter, a little girl still learning to hold her posture, but destined to become the most recognized face of the British monarchy. The tiara waited, and it didn't have to wait long. When the crown passed to the young Elizabeth, Britain stood on the threshold of a new era. Just yesterday, a nation worn down by war. Today, a kingdom yearning for stability, symbols, and a clear image of power strong enough to inspire confidence. And at the center of that image stood her, a 25-year-old woman stepping into the role of monarch at a time when no one expected resolve from a woman, let alone from a queen. From the earliest years of her reign, Elizabeth II understood the power of appearance. She instinctively felt the crown wasn't just authority, it was theater, and every detail of the costume spoke louder than words. And in this theater, jewelry was like the final line in the final scene. No room for mistakes, no overacting, no drowning in glitter. That's why the Vladimir tiara held a special place in Elizabeth's royal wardrobe. The tiara, little known at the time, mysterious, not originally British, with a history tarnished by immigration and imperial collapse. But to Elizabeth, that didn't matter. Or maybe it did. Because she chose it again and again, with striking regularity for state visits, royal audiences, official portraits, national holidays, and gala receptions. She wore this tiara more often than any other. Why? There are official explanations. Supposedly, it was more comfortable, lighter than others, versatile. Pearls could be swapped for emeralds or worn without pendants at all. It matched well with a necklace. But these rational points miss something essential. The Vladimir tiara was a living part of her identity. With every appearance, Elizabeth seemed to say, I'm not just the heir to the British throne, I'm the heir to all of monarchical Europe. But among the people, other stories circulated, legends, hints, whispers. It was said that the pearls in this tiara possessed a quiet power, that they could ward off misfortune, calm the spirit, and preserve mental clarity. In British tradition, pearls always carried special meaning, symbols of purity, restraint, and dignity, but this tiara somehow amplified those traits. People whispered, as long as that crown sits on the queen's head, nothing will happen to her. She'll reign for a very, very long time. And so she did. Elizabeth became the longest reigning monarch in British history. She endured crises, generational shifts, the fall of empire, family scandals, the death of her husband, protests, collapsing approval ratings, but she stood firm. And in almost every photograph from those turbulent years, there she was. And with her, the tiara, silent, steadfast, loyal. Still dazzling, still flawless, still unmistakably her. The Vladimir tiara remains today in the private collection of the British Crown, carefully restored, adapted to modern standards, yet instantly recognizable. Even after a century and a half, it continues to be a crown not just of beauty, but of memory. A memory of different times, different names, and different capitals. But who does it truly belong to? Formally, to the United Kingdom, a Windsor legacy, part of the royal family's private collection, legally acquired, properly documented, passed down through royal lineage, all in order, all official. But in spirit, the answer is far less clear. Because the Vladimir tiara was never created for London receptions. It was never designed for British etiquette. It wasn't born in the quiet halls of English palaces. It was shaped by the hands of St. Petersburg masters, conceived in the salons of the Russian court, and guarded in the shadows of Russian history. It was, and still is, a work of Russian jewelry art, exquisite, intricate, and rich with legacy. The kind of craftsmanship not made for show, but to preserve tradition. It could have become an exhibit in the Hermitage. It could have returned to St. Petersburg to stand beside other treasures of the imperial era. It could have, but it didn't. And not only because of politics, not just due to the lack of agreements or diplomatic gestures. It's about time itself. The turns of history that carried people and objects so far away, The road back became not just difficult, but impossible. This tiara is a traveler. It has survived weddings and conspiracies, splendor and downfall, exile and war, reinvention and coronation. It has seen the face of empire in the ballet halls of the Mariinsky and heard the whispers of fugitives on midnight train platforms. It was worn when the country thrived. It was hidden when the country fell. And it was lifted again from a suitcase when a new country and a new century began. Such a piece cannot truly belong to any one person or any one nation. It belongs to history, and history carries no passport. The Vladimir tiara remains in Britain and perhaps will remain there forever, but that doesn't mean she's lost to Russia. On the contrary, every time her pearls tremble under the studio lights, she reminds us of what was lost, and of what can still endure through collapse, revolution, exile, and crowns when beauty refuses to vanish. Because true relics don't disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to be remembered again. If this story moved you, be sure to like the video. It's the best thanks you can give. Subscribe to the channel to discover more secrets of royal relics, and don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss a new release. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next episode.